All right, welcome back to Her Advantage. We have found the record button. I have with me today Lydia. Lydia is a clinical nutrition and dynamic eating psychology coach. I did it. Who is the woman behind Internal Instinct. Now, Lydia, I think we need to start there. What is Internal Instinct?
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction and well done. Internal instinct means so much to me. And it's quite interesting because when I first began internal instinct, it's evolved so much.
This is what we want. I want to hear this.
Since I first came up with that as my branding and as what I wanted to base my practice on. But just to simplify it, I went to uni for nutrition and I came out with all this passion, thinking I knew everything. I was quite young, like 22 or something, and I came up with this idea that no one knows anything about health and nutrition and everyone's so disconnected, and I'm going to help them fire up their internal instinct and get them to trust themselves again and connect with food again and connect with nature. Which, how beautiful. Like,
well, it's still kind of the case, right? Like that's still
yes,
the absolute core of what you do.
it is still the core of what I do. I think the thought that I had initially was that people needed saving or that like people were broken and needed fixing. I definitely came from that kind of paradigm of like people just need to be, fixed. And now I have a little bit of a different approach, which, I'd like to share. But yeah, it just basically started with I loved the nutrition degree that I did, and I'm really grateful that I had it, but it was really intense and we weren't supported at all as to like what to do once you finish. There was no direct pathway. I knew I wanted to help people.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Everyone comes out and they're like, so I guess I'll become a teacher.
Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't super clear where to kind of go. And I personally have had a rough time in my body, like from a really young age, a really rough time and a lot of suffering that wasn't obvious to people. It was all very on the inside. And I felt like this suffering was coming from a place within me where I wasn't connected with something that my body was asking for. And my external environment wasn't providing me with what my body needed. And I thought that was like, I was quite angry actually where I was coming from. I was like, I always thought if I just lived in the bush and I was like a nature baby, I wouldn't have PCOS, I wouldn't have acne, I wouldn't have painful periods, I wouldn't be bloated. This like, I see you nodding. So
Like a 22-year-old Lydia or even 20-year-old Lydia was thinking this way?
yeah, big time. Yeah, just this thought of like, this deep belief of like, it's also messed up and like a sense of powerlessness. Like I have to be so pure in the way I eat and the way I live my life to even try to combat how intense it all is in the outside world. And
I'm smiling because I have a very similar story.
really,
Very similar. Yeah. I was like the most angsty, angry teenager of like, as we just talked about before we hit record, all of these PCOS, like super depressed. And the first thing I did was left Sydney. And I was like, oh, wow, there's a different life out here. So yeah, I totally get it.
yes, yeah, the anger, the angst, so relatable for me. And a lot of that was directed inward and outward, one of the same. I mean, I just should give a little bit more background. I know I'm jumping all over the place, but that's my style. Background as well, and I think a really important background is I had a lot of food intolerances from a young age. So from a really young age, my parents took me off heaps of food and told me that I can't tolerate these foods. And so I just kind of had this very stressful relationship with food from a young age. And I think me studying nutrition was me trying to get a handle on this thing that was harming me, and I wanted to find the perfect diet so that I could have a handle on it. And it was definitely sparked after I was diagnosed with PCOS at 16 and insulin resistance. And I did get to see a pretty good doctor who converted me from vegetarianism. But then I told her I was going to Europe for like, my gap year. And she's like, but what will you eat? And I'm like, I'm going to Europe. I don't know. And just this idea that I kind of had this fear in the back of my head the whole time I was traveling. And that's when I decided I wanted to study nutrition.
Yeah, right.
But from a much more like dogmatic place of like finding the rules. I want to study nutrition to find the rules. So the beginning of Internal Instinct was me coming out being like, okay, I want to help people connect with their gut health. I was really passionate about gut health and microorganisms and fermented foods. I spent time in Guatemala learning how to make sourdough. So I started with these wonderful workshops, teaching people how to make sourdough bread and teaching people about their internal world and how it impacts their entire body and all that kind of stuff. And then I transitioned into one-on-one consultations, and my goal was to help empower people. Unfortunately, I think the first couple of years of practice was pretty disempowering for
You were
people.
just trying to find your voice, though. You weren't actively going, I'm going to destroy people.
Not at all. Not at all. And I held so much forgiveness towards that version of myself. But yeah, I came out with, trying to find my mentors, and I worked alongside loads of naturopaths. And I definitely took the model of, testing people's food intolerances, taking people off loads of foods, doing SIBO testing, doing SIBO protocols, and just looking to all these textbooks that I had and going to all these seminars run by Metagenics and Bioceuticals and Biomedica. And, they sit there for hours at these seminars and they talk about all the diseases and they talk about the form of zinc and it's amazing. And you feel like, yeah, we're changing the world. But then when it comes to application of that poor person sitting in front of you, that is suffering immensely, and their symptoms are such a product of just so many aspects to their life. And I think the first thing I want to say is like I'm practicing in a small town. So the demographic that I see, although diverse, there's a lot of people living hard lives. Like, that's just all over the place. But in a small town, sometimes, lower socioeconomic communities and that kind of stuff. And you see this person and they're presenting with all these things, and you go through, when you're seeing someone and you're like, okay, I'm here to fix you. And you go through all the things you can think of, you look up all the textbooks, you put it all together, and you say to the person, okay, well, you got to take zinc and magnesium, you're going to need some hydrochloric acid with that, and it's like all these supplements that I'm saying, okay, take those. And then I'm like, and your diet, well, okay, basically you're going to need to cut out all these things. And what I was failing to recognize in the beginning is people just need help learning to live with themselves and being okay with who they are and learning how to kind of nourish themselves from the ground up. And so I was kind of trying to hang paintings on walls that weren't yet built.
What were some of the key moments in you realizing that?
Oh, so many key moments. I think the main key moment was when I'd be sitting there and a client's telling me all her symptoms, and I'm like, I've still got all those symptoms.
Yes.
I was sitting there going, I'm trying. It's
I'm
very
a theorist. I'm living the life. Yep.
I'm pretending that I'm living the life, like in my, my higher self thinks she's living that life. But then there's the darkest, self or the inner child that I haven't resolved this relationship with, that's still, little sabotage moments or whatever it is that's existing. But yeah, I'm trying, I've cut the dairy out. I'm not eating sugar. I don't eat gluten. I, don't eat too much. I'm really good at not overeating. And I do the yoga, I do the meditation, I've got the essential oils, like I'm taking the supplements. And the person's there telling me their symptoms, and I'm just like looking in a mirror, and then I'm telling them, hey, you just need to do this. And then I'm thinking, would I do that? Like, do I have the capacity to do that? I don't even have kids, I don't even have this, I don't even have that. Would I actually implement that? So there's a lot of key moments where that happened. And this happened a lot. I was just telling you before we recorded that I spent 5 years working alongside an integrative GP, working with all her patients. And I would be seeing, I did 1 day, and then I eventually did 2 days, and I'd be seeing full days of people, like anywhere between 10 to 16 people a day. So it was just like 20 minutes in and out, full on. And that's where I learned a lot, because I got to see people quite frequently.
Volume.
And I remember this moment so clearly. And I saw a lot of these people. So when I'm talking about this one person, there's actually many versions of this person that I've seen. But there's one in particular that was like the first one. They sit in front of me, and they've been put on a restrictive diet by a naturopath a couple of years ago. And they're still on this restrictive diet, and there's like 6 things they can eat. And they look so unhealthy. This person sitting across from me, and they have the perfect water filter. They're adding in all their supplements. They've got, 6 foods they can eat, and they've figured out ways to use the banana and the chickpea flour to make a pancake. We can't use the butter. We have to use the coconut oil. And I'm just like, I don't think this is how we're supposed to live our lives. And a big part of my job was telling people to cut gluten out, sugar out, dairy out, low carb, even keto, high fat. That was a big part of the world I got into, especially working alongside the doctor. That was the therapeutic diet. And I have this person, and many versions of this person, sitting across from me, and their diet is perfect on paper. Yeah. But their health symptoms are terrible. And they're like, if I eat this, I get hives. If I eat that, I get this. If I eat that, and I'm like, there's something going on here. And about that time, it was just at the beginning of the threat of lockdowns, I think. And I'd started slowly integrating away from putting people on restrictive diets, and more just, especially for we're working with the doctor, just listening to people and just seeing how nice that was. And then, there was this one moment where I got home after a really stressful day and just felt totally exhausted and was wondering what I'm doing. And I felt terrible in myself. And I read something popped up. And I read something probably on Facebook or on an email. I can't remember exactly. And it was talking about the benefits of dairy. And I can't even remember who this was. And it was just this moment where I'd literally spent the whole day just taking people off dairy, because dairy is inflammatory. They can't digest it. It's not benefiting their goals. It's contributing to their diabetes, whatever. And I just spent the whole day taking people off dairy, to then have this moment where it was talking about the benefits of how the balance of macronutrients in dairy and the importance of the calcium in combination with the other minerals. And it was this bizarre moment where I just knew that was the truth, and I just burst into tears. Oh. I just burst into tears, and I just knew to my core that I was down the wrong path of starving people.
Oh, that's fucking powerful, Lydia. Whoa. Yeah. Because I similar, like we talked about, I'm an exercise physiologist, and I worked with a lot of other allied health. And one of the key moments was I was running a workshop with a dietitian, again, in another really small rural town in South Australia. And we're coming into summer, and she's pulling everyone off salt. Don't eat salt. It's really bad for you. And I'm like, we're sitting here talking to an aging population in the hot, like it gets like 40 degrees is a normal day here in summer, and you want to pull people off salt. I was like, what the fuck is going on? And so for people like yourself to then be like, holy shit, we're actually starving people, we're doing the wrong thing, and being able to comment on that is really powerful and important, I think.
Yeah, it's not a nice experience in the moment,
So were
especially.
you yourself like off dairy, off all these things?
Yeah, I'd been off dairy since like I was 3, with the occasional, cheese and ice cream here and there, but they were treats and they would make me feel sick, and I'd get tonsillitis immediately, and I'd get a bellyache immediately, and diarrhea immediately. Like I had the worst IBS all through uni and all of that. That's a story for another time, I think. But yeah, I was off dairy. When I first met my partner, there's actually an ex of mine written an article about what it's like to date a nutritionist, and it sounds like being with a psychopath. It was awful. All the things. Like I literally went to his parents' house and I was like, there's nothing to eat here.
I was going to write an email on this the other day. I remember having like a fucking hysterical attack, not attack, but like fit. One of my best friends was over making dinner and we ran out of sourdough or something. And she's like, oh, we'll just use this bread. And I was like, what the fuck? Like yelling at her because she made dinner with the wrong bread. What the hell?
Yeah, and it's programmed into us, like I'll just quickly finish that thought, where when I met my partner now, I said to him, hey, we've got to get off dairy. He was like, okay. And he stopped consuming milk and all these coffees and all that kind of stuff, and he lost all this weight. He looked really skinny. Anyway, it was really scary for me, but he still ate cheese. He could never give that up. But for me to then change and be like, so dairy's now good.
I
I'm
was just
so
about to say, so Lydia, how's your relationship with dairy now?
So now it's like 40% of my daily calories come from dairy. But yeah, I mean, again, to kind of circle back on where I was going, very briefly, I was like affirming this. I was listening to so many nutritional experts, including but not limited to people like Dr. Mark Hyman, for example, who would interview people that would be like, I remember this Australian woman in particular saying, let's try to, it's really important to try to get as little calories in as possible from the most nutrient dense foods. And for someone like me, who comes from a background of trying to undereat to maintain this skinny body, that was like my goal. And as a lot of us are, like in society, we're all trying to be thinner in one way or another, generally speaking, or more attractive or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And for this nutritionist on this big podcast to say, like, try to eat as few calories as possible from as nutrient dense foods, I took to that. I was like, yes, like that gives me permission to eat less. And I just ate a whole bowl of all the colors, and it had, I didn't really understand calories at that time. That's another whole other thing. But
That can be
yeah.
episode 2.
Pardon?
That can be episode 2.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's going to take a while to get through the whole story of what is internal instinct.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just that whole world of eat less, and eat nutrient dense foods, and cut out the poisons, and cleanse and heal, and all of that stuff that I had to let go of. And when I saw that that article on dairy, I was like, okay, this is hitting home, but where are they getting this information from? Like this is so real to me, and this makes a lot of sense, but who are they? Who's this Dr. Ray Pete? Who is this guy? And then I'm like, well, I'm going to listen to some of his interviews. And I go back and he's like talking about drinking orange juice. And I'm like, this is so irresponsible. He mustn't understand modern people. Like, clearly orange juice is too high in sugar. This is absolutely ridiculous. And I had so much resistance, and my ego was just trying to hold on so desperately. So I then fell into this whole world of understanding, quote unquote, the pro-metabolic community, understanding the direction that Dr. Ray Peat was like sharing from. And I feel like his articles, his interviews, and even other people that are in that world that I really respect. I really like Denny Roddy's interviews. I really enjoy Georgie Dinkov's interviews as well. And I worked with Emma Skorakis. I did coaching with Livy Westcombe. I did coaching with Kitty's crew. And I just wanted to know so much. So I just put myself in these spaces where I was able to hear it from
everyone.
And the thing that really hit home to me was it was connecting a lot of the dots that I came out of uni with the passion for. And for me, what I've translated it all into is encouraging people to learn to live with themselves and come home to their body, and putting themselves in a position where they are worthy of being taken care of, and to focus on the macro and to focus on the real holistic medicine approach, what is going on wholly, and the energy side of nutrition, understanding that we are these energy beings and we need energy to digest and to have hormones and all these wonderful things. And it was very personal as well to have a lot of things answered for me. And I feel like now my business, I work one-on-one with clients, and it's so much more empowering for people. And people feel there's this beautiful thing that happens where I'm working with a client and they come to me with this heightened nervous system state, and they're so stuck in this story about what their health is, what their body is, and they're coming to me for all sorts of reasons. And they're just stuck in this panic, and it's almost like they're in a trance. And then I just go so much slower than I used to. We just go really slow with the changes, and they start trusting their body again, and they start being well fed, they start getting more food in, and they're trusting that they're not suddenly going to get fat if they eat. And there's all these beautiful transformations that happen. And then after about 2 months, the lights are on, and then they're seeing other things, and they're putting it all together, and they're suddenly the custodian of their body. And I'm just like, wow. And they're like, wow. It's just like they're awake. And look, it gives me goosebumps right now because, it's so
Custodian of their own body. That's like, so I say women taking back their sovereignty, but custodian of your own body. Fuck yes.
I love that. That's like the same wavelength.
Yeah. How do you find the conversation goes around exactly that? You talked a little bit about your journey and really trying to limit your calorie intake. Not that you knew really what like that sort of thing was, but eat as less as possible to fulfill your idea of what beauty and health was, to feeling really energetic. How do you find those conversations go?
There's so much resistance initially, and I actually quite enjoy that because it forces us to slow down a lot. But I always say that it was easier to tell, like initially, it's easier to tell people to cut stuff out than add things in. Like it's so like people come to me with preconceived ideas about what it is that I'm going to do. She's going to put me on a strict diet, going to tell me this is bad, and I'm going to believe her it's bad, and I'm going to finally stop eating it, and I'm going to stick to this plan. And I'm like, that's literally never happened. Even back in the day when I was giving that to people, they'd be like, I need a plan, give me a plan. And I give them a plan, and they'd be like, no, it didn't work. And I'm like, I get it, because you weren't empowered, you were disempowered, and that's fine. So the way it works now is, people have a lot of, I see people have a lot of resistance to eating more food because they think that's just, they're going to gain weight, and they have no a lot of my clients, when they come to work with me, they have no idea what a day of eating is supposed to actually tangibly look like. And it's kind of confusing in this day and age, because we can have foods that are really high in calories and really low in nutrients. And they can exist, like, they can be, 200 calories can be this big, it can be this big, it can be this big, it can be this big. You just, like, 200 calories looks different depending on the food. So a lot of people, and especially my clients that come to me who are overweight, struggle to have a concept of how much they're actually supposed to eat, because eating just equals gaining fat. So often I'll be like, okay, let's have brekkie. We're going to try to get 30 grams of protein in, and, we'll see how many carbs and fats you need, but we'll work around this. And they put all the food on the plate. They're just like, I've never eaten that much food at breakfast time. But what they have previously been doing is they've been not consuming enough food throughout the waking hours, throughout the sunlight hours. And then in the evening, maybe drinking huge amounts of alcohol, which is really high in calories, or chips, or chocolate, or just high calorie foods to compensate for what they haven't been eating throughout the day. So the way I feel the conversation goes, and my interpretation of it all, is I have to be really gentle. And I can't immediately jump in with, you're not eating enough, you have to change this. People can't hear that. So it's this lovely little gentle, my partner's just gotten home, this lovely little gentle easing into changing one thing at a time, and just, how does that feel? What's that feeling like for you? Any negative food reactions? No, isn't that interesting?
Amazing. Let's keep going. Building trust, right? Like finding the proof, building
Yeah.
up the evidence, and building trust.
Yeah. And just go, okay, let's just try this out. Try it out. Let's see what happens. If it doesn't work, you can cut it all out again, but let's just try out breakfast and see how that feels in your body.
Some of my favorite conversations are with my clients when when their husbands observe things. Like, I had a client the other day be like, yeah, we were in the garden and I just picked stuff up and I was moving it around, and my husband just stood there with his jaw on the ground. Are you okay? And I'm like, this is years into marriage, and all of a sudden she's just like taken off and doing her thing. I'm like,
Yes.
that's fucking cool.
That's so cool, isn't it? Like, this beautiful, strong, capable, physically powerful woman stepping in
Right?
into a place that was once someone that was scared of living in their body.
Yeah.
It's incredible work.
How do we so then, in saying that, this conversation, the approach that we have with clients has to be slow, so we can build trust with them so that they can build trust with their body. And we're definitely seeing a shift in the industry. Would you agree?
I don't know. I feel like there's just, what do you mean, like, broadly speaking?
Very broadly speaking.
What kind of shift?
That we're encouraging women.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That we're encouraging women about whole foods. It's not that we're talking about, I think you'll like this, talking about a holistic approach. I went to a live podcast recording, and they were talking about, it's not holistic health, it's whole health. And that aspect that it is mind, body, fuel kind of thing, all mixed together. It's not just one or the other. And so that shift is happening in recognizing that it needs to be a whole health approach rather than, let's just remove food from your diet, let's just take these supplements.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I love that there is that movement happening out there. And I think it's more happening, from my perspective, I see it more on like the internet level, because I feel like the world that I've created on Instagram, it's all these wonderful practitioners and coaches encouraging people to become well fed and to become strong and trust in the body, and look in your environment for things that are not serving you, and understand your relationship with yourself. Like, I definitely see that in my online world.
You don't see it in your real world.
Um,
In your
no,
real
in my real world. IRL. No, I live in a country town, you know, it's a small town, and I think because last year I stopped working for the doctor, and so I guess that definitely has shifted now because I'm working only on Zoom. And so I do see people all over the world now, and I see people that find me through the avenues of pro-metabolic practices and through people like Emma, which I'm so grateful for now. But yeah, up until last year, and that's probably a big part of where my opinion's coming from right now is, you know, I have a client just recently who was diagnosed with diabetes, and her doctor said, she's a new client, just said, cut out all sugar, cut out all sugar, cut out all carbs, cut it all out. And I have another woman that's not yet a client, but we're thinking about working together, and she's in the exact same position, and she's actually become incredibly ill as a consequence, and is like maybe close to being hospitalized. But that's a story for another time. And I feel like a lot of local natural and holistic and naturopathic healthcare providers in my area are still encouraging people to cut out histamine foods, cut out gluten, cut out dairy, cut out all these things as like the first line of treatment. And that's what I see a lot in my town still. So yeah, I don't see that translation so much in this part of the world yet.
In IRL. I would love to have the conversation about diabetes. You know, again, not so much in my world now, but definitely as a practicing exercise physiologist, that was one of the highest number of people that would come through to see me is people with diabetes. In your opinion, what is diabetes and where does it come from? And how can we really start to support those in our life with diabetes?
Big question. I'd say my first answer would be, if you're listening to this, this is not treatment, of course. Please use common sense and remember that you are an individual. You are 100% an individual. In my experience of diabetes, because it's quite personal for me, because when you're diagnosed with PCOS and insulin resistance, it's like, you're going to have diabetes, that's your path, cut out all sugar. And so I did that. So I guess just to simplify it, it's my opinion of what diabetes is it's the body not being able to convert sugar into energy. And the reason why you're not converting it into energy is due to stresses. And I can see you smiling.
Do you want me to turn my video off? I'll just let you talk.
Love your reactions. Thank you. And so stresses can come from so many different places, but essentially on a primal level, we're built for survival. And so what that means is we will metabolically adapt to whatever's showing up in our environment. And I approach health from the energy and stress balance, which is what bioenergetics is looking at. And that's like the teaching of Ray Peat. And it's this idea that when stress is really high, you need to have a lot of energy to be able to match that stress. And if you don't have the energy to match that stress, then we have metabolic adaptation. The body has to prioritize its functions to cope in this place where there's this disparity. And so diabetes, and the way I work with diabetes in clinic, is helping the human sitting in front of me make energy from their food and help the pathway of eating sugar or making sugar, because this is where we have some kind of cognitive dissonance when it comes to sugar. Whether we like it or not, sugar, or also known as glucose, sugar, glucose. I'm just going to use those words interchangeably, are a major source of fuel in the human body. There are cells in our body, like our brain cells and red blood cells, etc., that require glucose. And so if you have diabetes, it's not like, oh, well, all of a sudden you just don't need sugar because you're presenting with high blood sugar all the time. It's like, no, you're not getting that sugar. The reason why your blood sugar is so high is because you're not getting it into your cells and converting it into the energy that we use in our body. We use ATP, and there's many reasons why you're not converting that glucose into energy. It's not as simple as, oh, because you're eating too much sugar. And there is real harm to going cold turkey on cutting out carbs, because you still need sugar in your blood. And if you don't have sugar in your blood, you die. So if you don't eat the sugar, then your body has to work even harder to make sugar. And that increases this energy stress gap even more. And what can happen initially is people can cut out sugar and they could drop a bunch of weight and their bloods can look better on paper, but they haven't fixed the energy issue. And so after a period of time, other organs can start to shut down, other symptoms can start to present themselves.
It's a bit, yeah, it's a catalyst. It's a bit of a domino effect.
Yeah, for sure. So my best advice if you have diabetes
Is
would
to
be,
go and book in and see Lydia.
yeah, would be to come and have a chat. No, I mean, definitely, but also it's really important, I feel, that when we get a diagnosis, not to panic.
Yeah.
Like, your body's really smart. It's not broken. Your high blood sugar isn't this thing that your body's stupidly doing because it hates you and, you know, you've got the worst parents in the world that gave you this horror. Like, we have to start this beautiful coming home and healing relationship with what the body's presenting. And if it's presenting, it's just asking for help. It's not something, as I was talking about before, it's, you know, we come from this world, or we exist in this world where it's like disease is broken, problem, you need to fix it, it's bad. And I would say like physical suffering and mental suffering, and it's just full on, and it's a real experience, and it's hard living in a body that is presenting with uncomfortable symptoms. Yes. But we can't get through it by just trying to destroy ourselves even more and hate ourselves and think that there's something like so bad that the body's doing. And I think if you get this diagnosis of diabetes, it's this wisdom, it's this body sharing this wisdom that there's this, you're being pulled in too many directions, and you need to come home and make yourself a solid breakfast that's high in protein, sufficient protein, and some carbs and some fats. And maybe you just need to slow down and check in with how are you taking care of yourself.
And I think that can be one of the most uncomfortable questions. Honestly, I think people would rather cut out sugar than sit and go, how am I living my life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
No. I was about to go off into a little bit of a, like, why do you think that the specifically the Australian medical system is so behind in having the awareness around these subjects? We don't have, I can always edit this out if we need to, but like, it was part of the reason that I stopped doing what I was doing in the exercise physiology space, because I'm like, this is not, like I said, I'm not helping people in this space.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is that we are this big bit of land, Australia geographically. I think it influences the state of our healthcare and our medical system, because geographically we are quite isolated, and a lot of our information of what's happening out there in the world has to come from certain pathways and avenues that are being encouraged. Whereas if you're in a place where, I don't know, let's just say, because I think there's some things that Europe is doing great and some things in Europe's not great, but I really appreciate some preservation around nutrition. And I do feel like there's a lot of advancements in the medical world in various parts of Europe. And I feel like the thing with the geographical layout of somewhere like Europe is you've got so many different cultures physically close to one another that enables a bit more of diversity of communication about various concepts and ideas. Whereas in Australia, we're quite, I don't know, isolated is the best way I could put it. And I think that's the most politically correct thing I could say.
Well done, well covered. Fair enough. And I think as well, like I think what you were trying to say is with the proximity of those communities, like there's healthy discussions happening there.
Yeah.
Healthy, really healthy discussions, no pun intended, but being able to really understand different communities, different needs, and then be able to bring them together. Whereas, us, isolated in the middle of the ocean out here amongst the red soil. Yeah.
And I think just remembering at the end of the day, like we've created a medical industry. It's an industry that requires funding. And funding has to come from somewhere, especially when it's, there's a high demand for it. Or we can create a high demand for it, for there to be an industry to exist.
Correct. I absolutely agree. Speaking of industry, one of the topics that I pinned to talk to you about was IVF. IVF, IVF and menopause are two things that I'm seeing pop up a lot in my world lately. And I really, I have my own, obviously, beliefs about both of these things. But I would love to hear your experience, your opinion, your advice on these two big issues that we're seeing come up in our society at the moment. Two very different, obviously, ends of life, but coming back to a really core issue, maybe?
Yeah, well, I feel like it ties into kind of what I was talking about, which is creating an industry.
Yeah.
The medicalization of women's natural biological processes would be kind of where I'd start this. So, where do I even start? I'd say you're familiar with the work of Dr. Katarina Dalton, the woman who used progesterone therapy. She's the woman that made the medical industry seriously understand PMS as a diagnosable condition.
I don't know the name, but
Okay, so she has some great books. One of them, the PMS Bible, which is my Bible. Live by that thing. And where do I even start with that? It's quite amazing, the treatment. So back in the 1950s, she was using bioidentical progesterone to help women with their PMS symptoms, which were horrific. Like she was treating women that were incarcerated for crime committed during the premenstrual phase, like murder. That was like just the intense symptoms of PMS that can occur in women. And what drives me crazy is the ruling body of her medical practice brought her in and questioned her because it was quite expensive, that she was spending a lot of money. She's from the UK, so she was spending a lot of money of the medical system's money on giving these women bioidentical progesterone. And she could prove that it worked, and so they permitted her to continue with that therapy, but they said, don't encourage others because it's too expensive. I do think there is a financial incentive behind encouraging IVF, and HRT for menopause. Obviously, this is a really sensitive topic because a woman who wants to fall pregnant, what a vulnerable position you are in.
Mhm.
And I just want to say that I have worked with loads of women and helped them conceive. And some of them, they've already been on their IVF journey. And so I've just fully supported them on that IVF journey. I'm not here to say that I know everything and that IVF is inherently bad. And same with HRT. You know, so many women I meet, they're already on HRT. And I'm not going to be the one to sit here and say, I know better, cut that out, you know, because it has saved their lives. Menopause, struggling with fertility and having a horrific time with menopause can be life-threatening to you. It is psychologically destroying. It's so destructive, and very isolating as a woman. It's a very isolating experience.
I think
Even
both journeys. Yeah, yeah.
even though it's a collective thing that a lot of women are experiencing. So I would say that there are unique cases where IVF is required, and great that we have this modern medicine, incredible. And I would say there are certain situations where hormone replacement therapy in the conventional sense is required, and grateful to have that for those women who need it and they can't do anything else. But I want to circle back to this idea of progesterone and this idea of being a well-fed woman. And fertility is more than just taking the supplements and taking your temperature and checking your luteinizing hormone and having sex all the time. It's so much more than that. Your fertility it comes from a place of how safe is your body? Like, how safe does your body feel? And we have beautiful science when we look back at history, and we can see times where population has dropped and populations increased in certain areas based on access to food and access to calories. And it's a really smart thing for a mother to not conceive in a state of malnourishment. And what we don't understand is, even in this beautiful modern Western society where we have Coles and Woolworths and loads of food around us, a lot of us are not consuming adequate calories consistently for not just survival, but for the production of hormones in the hypothalamus and pituitary to then translate to thyroid, to adrenals, to ovaries, to communicate the complex hormonal pathways that are required to not only hatch the egg, transport the egg in through to the uterus, and then enable this beautiful lining to nourish the egg, to then grow the egg. And what a lot of women don't realize is that that baby inside of them isn't made from magic. It is made from the tissue that we have in our bodies. And if it's just not there, then the baby can't survive. And that's a really sad thing. And I think that a lot of us women, we're more distracted by the appearance of our bodies than the function of our bodies. So I think another part of it as well is how physically strong we are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our fat-free mass, how much muscle do we have on our body? You know, how strong are we? I think that's really important for women. And I think there's very little consideration of those things. And I did an Instagram post the other day saying that I believe farmers treat their animals better when it comes to their animals' fertility. I'm going to get, oh my gosh, anyway, fertility and the well-being of the mothers that, you know, that they're creating in their livestock, because they make money off livestock giving birth. Whereas I feel like in the human world, we make money off women not being able to fall pregnant.
Absolutely. It's all right. We're not supposed to be eating meat. So that industry, 100%. I'm actually interviewing a regenerative farmer for this season, and she is one of the most soul-driven women in her processes and the way she talks about farming. She herself has 4 kids, I think. So family is a really big thing for her. But even just talking about that process and exactly that and understanding, because I think that's something else Australians think that, again, meat is destroying the planet, which it's not. To understand these farming processes, to go, holy shit, they do really care about what's being created. So maybe we should too.
That's a big point. Yeah, here in Australia, we have incredible farmers and we have an incredible farming culture that isn't just a bunch of factories. It's like real people that know how to read their livestock, and their whole life is taking animal husbandry. And I just think what a beautiful pursuit. And the older I get, the more I think there's a lot to be said for being able to take care of things in your environment, like having children, having gardens, having animals, having this kind of ecosystem that you take care of.
Can I tell you that when I saw you guys bought a farm, I was like, oh my God, they're going to be Strong Sisters Australian version.
Oh my gosh, yes. Oh, that would be our dream. Well, actually, my partner has a wedding business. So they
Hey.
have Strong Sisters have a wedding business, and like we have plans of putting a wedding venue on the property eventually.
Yeah.
So that's the goal, but we're a long way off, that's for sure.
Is
But
there a homestead on the property?
so the property at the moment is a dilapidated house, a shed, an old chook shed, a huge dam, and a lot of potential.
And 2 people with a fuckload of passion and education.
That's exactly it. And yeah, I think from my perspective, um, I'm a very sensitive person, and I want to have the health and the physical well-being and the mental well-being that I know I can have. And I know that creating this life out on the farm is going to enable me to live in alignment with who it is that I want to be, and live true to my values, and be honest, deeply, radically honest with my needs as a unique individual. And it's a big pivot that obviously is scary, and there's so much work, and it's overwhelming, and financially it's a fascinating journey and all that kind of stuff. But it's just this like, oh, like last year when I quit the job working for the doctor, that's like in an office from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. You don't see the sun, you're on adrenaline all day. And I'm like, I don't want to live like that. And to be brutally honest, can I circle it back to pregnancy? As a PCOS girly, like, I'm not going to take my fertility lightly. I'm not going to just try to fall pregnant and hope for the best. I've never tried to conceive, but I've definitely been spending the last 4 years with my intention of, building muscle so that I'm strong enough to carry babies and then carry children. And that's been a big part of my evolution. The other thing is like eating enough food consistently to encourage healthy cycles and to encourage good sleep and that re-nourishment that my hormones require. And then also understanding how to parent myself and like myself, because if I'm going to have kids, then I need to like myself because they're kind of going to be some version of me. So, learning to have that relationship within myself of, I really like Marion Rose, who has a podcast called Aware Parenting. I really love her approach. And I actually feel like this ties in really well to nutrition and helps people feed themselves. That's a story for another time. Um, but for us, moving to the land is also taking into consideration, okay, my fertility. I'm thinking about how beneficial it will be for me to be in alignment with a lifestyle that I have the opinion of being nourishing for me.
You're just being fully connected. You're really using your internal instinct, like knowing that this is how you want to mother and this is how you want to parent, this is how you want to be as a partner. And look, we're not saying that everyone has to go and move off grid and live their happy farm life, but it is just being so in touch with who you want to be and how you want to live and being honest about it.
Yeah, that honesty part's really tricky because there's a lot of confusion out there, trying to like I'm a people pleaser. And so it's just that like recovering people pleaser. It's that idea of like, what is it that I want? Like doing what I thought was expected of me versus doing what I want. And that's really scary. And it's not without like, yeah, there's lots of scary things when it comes to being deeply honest with ourselves, for sure.
I mean, I think we need to wrap up, but something that like another like tangent that I would love to go down with you is that whole, like, again, you and I both have a history with PCOS, tied in with mental health, tied in with people pleasing. And again, knowing that a lot of the things that we talk about and a lot of the conditions that we talking about have spoken about, while there's definitely an avenue to support through diet and exercise, there is a really huge component of being able to understand who you are fundamentally to lift that stress on another level.
Yeah. Uh, it's I was really grateful. So the dynamic eating psychology coaching part of my qualifications are working with, I studied through Mark David, the psychology of eating course. And what's really interesting and what I saw in my practice for years, and then what he gave words to, is that a lot of eating challenges, body challenges, health challenges, or even like having a health challenge that means you have to change how you feed yourself and move your body or whatever. A lot of those are kind of like lights being shined on areas of our life that we're not living in alignment with ourselves. It's saying yes when you mean no, and then the physical lethargy that comes with that. Or it's the, eating something when you don't want to eat it, and then the physiological response that comes from being in that stress state as you're eating something to please someone else or whatever it is. Or it's going to a job every day that you hate, and it shows up. The mind and the body aren't separate. It's like your interpretation of your environment has to manifest somewhere.
Yeah.
And so did I go on a tangent, or was that in the line?
No, that's perfect. Yeah. And I think though, I mean, you and I understand this as you're 30, aren't you? You're over 30?
Yes.
As 30-something-year-olds, we understand this. But, if you think about when our PCOS first manifested in our teen years, I mean, I know that my parents were trying their best to give me this perfect life, and there was absolutely nothing that they did to cause my PCOS, but I was a miserable child. And I'm sure that you had similar themes, that like you felt like you had no voice, or you felt you were, not being seen or heard in some aspect. And so it's not as if you choose to put a shadow over the things that you need to be paying attention to. And it can be really hard to communicate that in your teen years as opposed to when you're 30.
For sure. I think there's all these things we had to go through in various
Yeah.
ways, had to explore. And when you're a teenager, you just have to be a teenager. Unfortunately, when I was a teenager, I was trying to be an adult. And so that's where it's the masks. You start putting the masks on. I'm an adult. I've got my shit together. I know what I'm doing. I know better than you. And it's just that, how that can roll into a lot of other things, like the stress and the angst. And and all sorts of things like that, and people's expectations of you that are obvious or not so obvious. So yeah, you said something that was really really quite nice, and I think a really important reminder for anyone listening, and that's that we don't need to minimize, like you said, my parents were doing the best and they, everything was lovely, I guess, on paper, but we don't need to minimize our interpretation of the experiences we've been through. Like, that's really unfair to ourselves. Like, if you feel like certain situations make you stressed or heightened or nervous, I'd say most of us, our parents would say, hey, get over it. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. And how isolating is that? It's like, oh, it's not a big deal. Well, I'm about to have a, nervous breakdown about this thing. And you're telling me it's not a big deal. So then the communication in our head becomes like, immediately before we even complete the feeling, it's like, get over it. It's not a big deal. And that's so, and then it brews and it stays with us instead of this lovely completion of the emotion. And that's what I really love about the Aware Parenting podcast, is it's actually helping me understand how to emotionally resolve things within myself. And that's by not being a dick to myself. Like, if I feel anxious about calling the mechanic, I feel anxious about that. It doesn't mean I can't do it. It just means I feel a bit anxious about it. And so I'm going to sit with myself and say, hey, it's all right. You feel a bit anxious about that. It can be scary calling someone who you don't know and about something that you don't know that may end up in a really high bill that you don't know. Like, there is fear, and you're allowed to be scared and feel that. Oh, what's it feel like in your body? Oh, it feels like butterflies. It feels like tension. It feels like tightness. It feels like I can't do it. Oh yeah, wow, that must feel like a lot. You're going to do it anyway. It's just a feeling.
Yeah. I was funny. I had a similar conversation with myself this morning, and like, but even that, like, having those conversations, you're like, oh, stop being fucking crazy. Don't talk to yourself. Hang on a minute. Like, so much judgment. And so when you talk about being a dick, like, it just sneaks in at every little tiny angle. And I think, again, it's a point of reflection when you catch yourself to just go, oh, that's interesting. Like, it's not like, just try not to add any more judgment that is already being piled onto that plate.
Yeah, approaching it with that curiosity and that gentleness that you would approach like any other living person. Hopefully you'd approach with that compassion and gentleness. But yeah, it's a learning process. I definitely have layers, and whenever my partner says to me, oh, you're so hard on yourself, I'm like, oh, another thing that I haven't. Oh, okay, all right, sit with that. It's
Yeah.
endless, but this is fun playing. It's like a fun thing to unpack and not get bogged down in this idea of, you asked me a question that was like a myth or something in my industry, a myth that I want to get rid of. And that's this idea of perfect health. I just think that is a pointless pursuit, and you don't want, what is where, what, like, what is
I
perfect
think
health?
if people genuinely ask themselves that, they're like, I just want the perfect health. Okay, what is that? What to you, what is that? Like, fuck, I want to wake up in the morning and have energy. Well, let's work on that, shall we? Not like this whole idea that when you walk down the street, you're going to glow and people are going to be like, whoa, tell me how you did it.
Yeah, and I think people think it's the absence of ever feeling uncomfortable or feeling like uncomfortable in your feelings and in your body. But I'm like, you're always going to be growing and evolving, and things come out of your body that are expressions of where you're at. And we don't need to name and blame and shame. It's just like, experience the discomfort of it, and trust that your body can get through it. But that's why I don't like it, is because I thought that perfect health existed. I was kind of sold that belief, that idea that, you want perfect health and it is attainable. And I think that's a pointless pursuit. You can have more
All
energy.
started there though, and I think if you talk to anyone in our circle who we respect and ask them where they started, they'd say something very similar, I'm sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. We've got to start somewhere.
Yeah. Why not be perfect?
Yeah. And perfectionism is a disease. It's a disease. It's the real disease that we're trying to recover.
It is.
Um, but yeah, it's just I think it's perfect health in this comparison. And like I've worked with a lot of health practitioners. I've worked with as a client and then also professionally as colleagues. And none of those practitioners have perfect health.
Mm-mm.
And a lot of them are selling perfect health in various ways without realizing it. It's just like the pictures they're painting. And I've had a lot of experience in various naturopathic practices, working alongside, seeing how they feed themselves and all that stuff. It's quite interesting. So yeah, I think that just if you're listening to this, don't be so hard on yourself. You're doing pretty good, and maybe it's time to like soften in and let's start learning how much food you need to eat, and let's start building solid foundation with enough food and movement.
Let's wrap it up there. Let's wrap it up on a really strong note, because I'm sure that we could keep going, especially with that last little tangent that we could have gone on. That yeah, women, it's okay to feel fueled. It's okay to feel your emotions. It's okay to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. And listen. Listen to your body, listen and trust, and we don't have to translate that to fear or like fix.
And if you are a little confused, Lydia is a very approachable person. Slide into her DMs, slide into her emails, however you want to contact her. You have a podcast too, right?
Yeah, it's currently under construction, but yeah, it's a Lydia Irving food education.
Yeah, so if you want to hear more, you can go and absorb through that way. Otherwise, thank you so much for jumping on with me today, Lydia.
Oh, what an honor. My goodness. As you know, I could talk about this till the cows come home.
Anything else you want to say? You're
No, I think I've said a lot. And I guess the one thing I want to wrap up is remember that you are a beautiful individual, and learning to have a relationship with yourself in all areas, learning to feed yourself and all those wonderful things can be really nourishing and a lovely pursuit. And get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. I have lots of things to share.
I have a big thing that, when you're listening to this podcast, if you do have a really big light bulb moment or takeaway, both Lydia and I would love to hear it. So please slide into our DMs and let us know. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Whew, that's it for another episode. If you had any moments while you were listening to that episode, I would love to hear them. Pop me a message on Instagram at MelanieK_ and let me know what they are. And don't forget to subscribe so that you and I can spend a little bit more time together in the next episode. Until then.